Hi, Stephen here for the Idiot Quilter, and here's another interview in my series of interviews. Hi, everybody. It's Stephen here for the Idiot Quilter, and here's something I haven't done in quite some time. I'm doing an interview, and I am interviewing someone I think you're all going to really enjoy, and I am surprised that more people haven't heard about Cole Whitaker. He is an art quilter, um, does foundation paper piecing. We'll be getting into all of that soon. He teaches online. He has a website where he sells his kits and other things, and we'll talk all about that. So I'm really excited to have you on the show today. I'm a little rusty in my interview skills. So if I trip over my tongue or whatever, hey, my subscribers are used to me doing that, so not to worry. But let's just start. I've already said your name is Cole Whitaker, and where are you from, Cole?
I'm near Seattle, Washington. If you know the area, I'm not actually in Seattle.
Oh,
I'm in
okay.
Monroe, which is sort of a little farther out, but I'm in the Seattle, Washington area.
Okay, so you're a ways away, and when we were setting this interview up, I had to take into consideration that I'm 3 hours ahead of you
Yeah.
with it, which is not a problem for me. That was fine. So let's jump right into it. How long have you been quilting?
I learned how to quilt when I was 5 years old.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So
So you've only
I,
been doing it a couple years.
but I tell people that I haven't been quilting consistently the whole time. So I don't like to claim that necessarily. But when I was a child, my grandmother, she was a quilter and she taught me how to quilt. And I have wonderful memories of her walking me to her closet, and I got to choose from her stash, and she would show me how to cut out the pieces and sew them together. And um but then once I became an adult and picked a career, I kind of forgot about it, and I would sew periodically here and there, mostly garment sewing, or like if I needed a bag or if someone needed a wedding dress. I know it sounds like someone needed a wedding dress. Sure, well, I did that a few times. But I didn't really get back into quilting until only about 4 years ago,
Oh,
actually.
okay.
Yeah. So my my like quilting all the time has only been a few years, but I've known about it for a long time.
So you mentioned garment sewing. So, and wedding dresses, and you just sort of passed that off. Oh, yeah, I made a couple of wedding dresses. Yeah, well, being someone like me who is a non-garment sewer, and that the whole idea of even sewing even something simple in a garment scares me to death. Um, what was it about quilting that made you switch over, or are you still doing garment sewing as well?
I don't do a lot of garment stuff. So my grandmother also sewed clothes, and she would sew clothes for all her grandchildren. And so she taught me. And I remember one summer I learned how to make shorts, and I made shorts for like a bunch of our cousins. Um, and I actually thought about going into fashion design when I was younger, um, but ended up going into cosmetology and becoming a hairstylist. So because I had done it here and there, I kind of stopped doing it as much because two reasons. One, it used to be cheaper to make clothes.
Hmm.
And then it got to the point where it wasn't because the fabric's so expensive. And two, I really liked making dresses, but I didn't know a lot of people that wanted to wear dresses. So it was kind of like, who am I making this for? I don't know.
Right.
So then it ended up like if I had someone and they were like saying they needed a specific thing, I would be like, well, if you want, I can do that for you. So it's just been sporadically here and there. But quilting, the reason why I love quilting is because I've always been really artistic and creative, but I like practical things. So like I went through phases where I would paint and it was fun, but you just have a bunch of paintings and what do you do with them? I
Right.
mean, yeah, you could hang them up on the wall, but a quilt is something you can use.
Yes.
It's like it can be art, but it can also be used as a picnic blanket. It could be used on the couch. It could be used on your bed. There's there's so many different ways that and it's practical and you don't have to fit it to anybody.
True. I,
So
I, I
that's why I pretty much switched over to quilting.
I understand what you mean about the painting and that because before I was a quilter, I was a paper crafter, scrapbooker, art journalist, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, exactly. You make all these things. What are you going to do with them? They're art, but you only have so many walls in your house. And art is a very personal taste.
Yeah.
You give a piece of art to somebody and they go, "Oh, isn't that nice?" And they're decorating the inside of their garbage can with it. So yeah, and quilting, now, unlike yourself, you had a grandmother that quilted. Now, I did have a grandmother that quilted, but I don't ever remember seeing her ever quilt. Uh,
Mhm.
that I think she did that much earlier in her life. By the time I was around and things like that, I think she had stopped doing that. My mother never quilted. She sewed clothes from a practical point of view, mainly for not for my brother and I, but she sewed them when my sister came along. She sewed some clothes for my sister and for herself. But I don't think she enjoyed the process. So basically, I didn't come from a root of sewing and I had no desire to sew. The only reason I started sewing was because I bought a cheap sewing machine because I thought I could use it in my paper crafting. And
Yeah.
then I tried something and I got a little bit hooked and thought this is kind of fun. And well, now my sewing room, which used to be my craft room, craft stuff out, sewing quilt stuff in. And you're right about the expense on clothing. My husband sews clothes. Well, he sews all my shirts and his shirts, and he makes pants and he's made a jacket and he's very good at it. I'm trying to get him more into the quilting and he's starting to lean towards that way. But yeah, like when people see our shirts, oh, love your shirt. Where'd you get it? He made it. Oh, does he sell them? No, you can't afford them.
Yeah, it'd be so
Okay.
expensive.
Well, like with just the material alone, and then you start adding in the time, you're talking like the shirt I'm wearing today. That shirt, if it was to retail, is over $100 or more if
Yeah.
it was in a store. And then people think, oh, because you've made it handmade, it's got to be cheap. And that's the problem with us as quilters, isn't it? The value. We'll talk a little bit about value of quilts and things like that in a bit. But just to get back on track here, so you started out sewing when you were 5. You've been really quilting seriously for 4 years. You mentioned the fact that you had a career as a cosmetologist, hairdresser. Do you still do that, or is quilting is your art quilts? Is that your full-time job business?
Yeah, it's not my full-time job. So what happened was I decided to become a hairstylist and then I found out I could teach and I've always wanted to be a teacher. I went to beauty school as a backup plan. And then when I found out I could teach, I fell in love with it and I taught cosmetology school for 20 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
then what happened was I actually came down with some chronic illness symptoms, which we still don't know exactly why they're happening, but and burnout and whatnot. And I ended up having to quit my job in 2021.
Hmm.
And it was around that time that I got into quilting and I decided to finish. I had been going back to school because I wanted to teach. I wanted to be able to teach at a community college and not just vocational school. So at that time, I was like, okay, I'll finish my schooling. So I finished my master's degree and with the goal of teaching at a college. And I just in July got my dream job teaching at a local college, which I'm so excited about.
Oh, wow.
So that's my full regular job. But I during the time when I was in between jobs and I was really sick, sewing I tell people sometimes it saved my life because I was in so much pain and I was so depressed because I had tied all of my worth to productivity and my job. And so sewing gave me something to look forward to. It gave me something to be proud of. And and people were liking it and people were asking me to do commissions. I started thinking, oh my goodness, could this be my job? That would be wonderful. Unfortunately, things don't usually move that fast.
No,
Um, but it's okay because I ended up getting this teaching job, which I love. And so my ultimate goal would be to be able to balance
too.
both. I like that as a faculty at a college, the job schedule is not like a 9 to 5. It's kind of flexible. And so my hope is that because that's flexible, that I'll be able to keep doing quilting because it's become such a huge passion for me.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned the fact that you were sick and this was basically quilting was your therapy and everything for that. But I've heard that from so many people. And
Yeah.
especially during COVID, that's, suddenly there was a boom and everybody was quilting and it was therapy. For me, I started just before COVID. I mean, I've only been quilting for about 6 years, maybe seven now, but I started 2017, I think, and by accident. And I too was a teacher. I was a high school English teacher, but I'm retired, and I've been retired now for going on to almost 13 years. And you know, retired people always say to you, "What are you going to do when you retire?" And a lot of people don't have a plan. I did, but it didn't include quilting. But now it does, for sure.
Yeah.
With that, I mean, it is my passion as well. I mean, I start working on quilting and sewing from the moment I get up in the morning, pretty much until dinner time at night. Just before you came on here, I was out with my long arm getting another quilt with that. But I think it's the creativity of the process. And I think you would probably agree with this since you're a very creative person and you mentioned you love the creativity part of it. So you had your grandmother influenced you in your family. Was there any other influences in your family or amongst friends, or was this just something you dived into it?
Well, the reason that I ended up getting back into it as an adult in the last few years actually is kind of a funny story. I was my husband and I had bought a house in 2019, and he has an office because he works from home. And then there was another extra room that we were trying to decide should it be my office. And I was like, I really want a guest room because, I want if someone comes over, they have a place to stay. And so I was theming the guest room and I wanted it all to be video game themed. And we had our old like NES in there and stuff. And so I was like, well, I want a Super Mario Brothers comforter for the bed. So I go on Amazon and I'm like, I'll just buy one on Amazon. So I'm scrolling through Amazon and I I don't like any of them. First of all, they all just look, it's like they Photoshop an image onto a stock photo of a
Yeah.
comfort, you don't know what you're getting. And it was all the new version of Mario Brothers. And I was really envisioning something from my childhood of like the
Classic.
original 8-bit, right? So I'm moaning about it to my husband, and he was like, why don't you just make one? You know how to sew. And funny story, I had at the time, so I've sewn on lots of different sewing machines that were like my mother's or whoever's. And but I had at the time the cheapest Singer sewing machine because I had got my car fixed at Canadian Tire and they messed it up. And I went back in and was like, you better give me a refund. And they said, best we could do is store credit. And I said, all right. And I don't know if you know this, but Canadian Tire sells sewing machines. So I'm walking through Canadian Tire and I'm like, a sewing machine, great. So I had it, but I hadn't used it much. And so I was like, okay, well, yeah, I guess I could make it. So again, my first thought wasn't like, I'm going to do something elaborate. My first thought was, I'll go find some Mario fabric and I'll just do a tie quilt. Like, I just want it done. And so I went to Joann's and they were like, we're not licensed to sell Nintendo fabric. And so I'm waiting for my mom to finish looking through the garment patterns and I'm trying to think where else I could go. And I just had this moment where I thought, pixels are just squares.
Mhm.
How difficult can it be? I'll just make it. So I went home and I grabbed my graph paper and I just started drawing it out and I just did some math. And that was the first quilt. Now, because I was taught from my grandmother, I only knew how to do it the way she like I hadn't been like looking for information online, right? So when it was time to quilt it, I went and bought some 2x4s and some clamps and I did a frame and I hand quilted it.
Wow.
And my husband was like, you should post pictures online. And I was like, why would I post pictures of a quilt on the internet? Like, who would want to see that? Little did I know,
Yep.
right? So I posted on Reddit and I got all this big response. Oh my goodness, that's so awesome. And then I started getting questions, and that's when the snowball obsession started because I just knew what my grandmother had taught me. So people started saying, "Oh, I noticed you're using a frame. Why do you like a frame over a hoop?" And I was like, "People quilt with hoops." I thought hoops were for embroidery. So then I tried quilting with a hoop, and then people were like, what is this and what is that? And then I started I learning what a long arm was, and then I commented on someone's picture and I was like, "That quilting is amazing. Is it hand quilting?" And she was like, "Oh God, no." And I said, "Oh, you have a long arm?" And she's like, "No." And I was like, "What?" And that's when I got into free motion quilting, and then I did eventually end up buying a long arm. But basically, it all started because I was trying to create this one quilt, and at the time I was really sick and it was all I could do. But then getting all these positive responses from people and learning more about quilting, I sort of realized that in my opinion, the quilting community in Reddit is like the nicest place on the internet. Like
Yeah.
everyone's so kind and so supportive and so willing to ask and answer any questions. And it really just spurred me on. And then after I made that one of my friends was like, "I will pay you to make me one." And I was like, "Okay." And that's kind of how it all started snowballing.
Yeah.
So I would say it wasn't necessarily like another person or something that was an inspiration as much as
The circumstances.
the circumstances and then the community,
Yeah. It
right?
grows. You get involved and it's more. I've
Yeah.
never belonged to anything that is so all encompassing. It's not just cutting up fabric and putting it back together again. It's the people that make it because they, at least for me, they inspire me. I see what somebody else is made and go, "Oh, I love that," or "I love those colors," or "That's a unique looking block." And it just gets me all excited all over again. I'm never bored when it comes to quilting. There's always something new. The quilt that's on my long arm right now, I did it completely on my serger. I have never done that before.
Oh wow.
I
Yeah.
don't know if I'll ever do it again, but I'm doing it for my viewers because my husband and I do an episode every week where we have a series of things, and we're doing one on sergers and cover stitch machines. And he's looking at it from a garment sewer's point of view. I'm looking at it from a quilter's point of view. So I thought I'd think outside of the box. So yeah, it's not something I think I will do again, but that's tune into my channel when I put that up and talk about that and why. But I'm digressing here. Um, so what's your, well, one thing before I forget to say it, because you said two words that came out of your mouth and I'm going, huh? You said you were in the Seattle area, but you said you bought a sewing machine from Canadian
Yeah.
Tire.
I
Wait.
I was living in Canada for a little bit.
Okay. I was gonna say,
Back in around 2010, I was living in Burnaby, which is by Benton, Vancouver,
yeah,
and I would commute over the border for work. I know it's very weird.
yeah. Well,
I was working mostly online for a cosmetology school, and then I would drive over and I'd work a few hours in the office. Um, yeah, and so that's why I was at Canadian Tire.
yeah, 'cause I was going to say, I don't think there's a Canadian Tire in the
There
States.
is
But,
not.
but anyways, but that's really kind of cool. Of course, a lot of the people watching this, unless they've been a regular viewer of mine, they won't recognize Canadian Tire unless we turn around and call it Crappy Tire. Then they'll know what I'm talking about because that's what we call it,
Yeah.
Crappy Tire. Okay, so let's talk about your creations. Now, you started out, sounds to me like you didn't really start out as a traditional quilter. You are doing unique, one of a kind art like quilts with that Mario quilt. And I know you're into art quilts because I've looked through your YouTube videos and everything like that, and they're gorgeous. I wish I could do something like that. You obviously have artistic talent. I'm artistic challenged. So that's why, but I've always wanted to do one. But anyway, so have you ever made just a conventional, traditional quilt?
Uh, I have I have the one I made when I was 5 years old.
Okay.
and it's just squares. But like even when my grandmother taught me, so she never used patterns. You would just pick some fabrics and decide on shapes and sew them together.
Yes.
So when I had the idea for the Mario quilt, I was kind of like, well, it's squares. I could figure that out. But sort of going off of that idea, the thing that I like about any creative thing, but especially quilting, is the design process.
Mm.
So like I get really excited by seeing something cool and going, I could do that. How could I do that? I could figure out how to do that. Like it's the figuring out how to do it that's exciting to me. So I've never used a quilt pattern. And I actually didn't even realize the quilt patterns were a big thing until I started posting pictures and people would be like I posted the first Mario quilt and they were like, "Oh, yada yada the pattern." And I was like, they were like, "Oh, can you share the pattern?" And I was like, "It's in the trash." Like, what do you what do you mean? And so then I started after a while, I was like, oh, people want patterns. And then I started coming up with a way where I could make them digitally and keep them because I realized other people wanted them. But I never used patterns myself. And I think that's because what I love about quilting is coming up with an idea and then creating it.
Yeah.
So
Makes it one
I,
of a kind.
yeah, and I just never, I have so much appreciation for traditional quilts, but it's not fun to me.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why my question was going to be, how would you describe yourself as a quilter? And I think you already have. And I had suggestions like traditional, modern, freeform, experimental, or exploratory. I would say that you probably fall in the category of exploratory and experimental,
Yeah.
maybe because
Yeah.
of,
I mean, you could say modern, but again, I feel like when I picture modern quilts, like a lot of the quilts I saw at QuiltCon, a lot of them look like modern art. I'm not a big modern art. I'm not a big like, oh, it's just a bit like it's a circle. It's like
yeah,
one circle and then it's black. And I'm like, and see, I've always been artistic, but I felt like when I was younger, I felt like in order to be artistic, I had to be able to appreciate art and have opinions on it. And so I tried. And what I realized is that I didn't get it. Like when people would like have splattered paint and they'd look at it and they'd go, "Oh, it makes me feel this," or "I see this," and I'm like, "I see splattered paint."
yeah,
And it's great if you like that, but like I just I don't really get it. And it might be, I don't know, it might be because I am autistic and I do tend to take things literally. And I did try going to art school. I went to art school for a semester and then decided it was too much money. But you had to like bring them a portfolio. So I brought a bunch of my paintings. And basically what they said to me is, your technique is great, but everything's just too literal. Like
mm,
you have to learn to be less literal. And I was like, I don't know what to tell you. And so my quilts now, like they're they're not as modernist in that they're not like vaguely up to interpretation. Like they're just pictures.
yes.
But I just like pictures.
Yeah. Well, you want to know something though, too. And I know this will step on toes of a lot of people in the art community. But I used to volunteer when I first retired. I volunteered at our local art gallery as a docent. And and I knew nothing about art. I mean, I know what I like and I know what I don't like, kind of a thing, kind of like you. I don't get it on some of these installations they had, a string hanging from the ceiling with a bullseye on the floor. That's art. Okay, don't get it. And there's a big long explanation for it, but still don't get it. And I think there's a whole lot of BS in the art
Wow.
community. I think you can make up. In fact, I'm kind of telling you a little secret here, but when I would take school kids around to look at the art, right? And if I get some of the older kids, I thought I'd just have a little fun with them because, well, I was a high school teacher, and so I do have a sadistic streak. And I'd make up stories. I go, yes. Now, if you look at that dot of blue right there, that doesn't that make you feel very calm and cool? But it's right next to that yellow and it's putting the fire. And I'd make up these stories and they'd be looking at me and go, oh, yeah, I see that. Oh, no, you don't.
No, I totally agree with you. I think art, in my mind, art is something that creates some sort of emotional reaction in a person when they view it, visual art, right?
Yep.
And so to me, my quilts do that. I mean, like my quilt Joy that was at QuiltCon and at the International Quilt Festival, it got a lot of um, good feedback. My artist statement later, I was like, my artist statement was crap, but I literally was like, well, I designed it and I quilted it and I named it Joy because that she looks happy. Like that was my artist statement. But to me, it's like it's not about there being an elaborate explanation. You
No.
know, if you create something that other people enjoy, that's art.
Yeah, I think so. And I think too, it's in the eyes of the beholder. It's whatever. And, it's like when I taught literature. I was taught in a very traditional way when I took my degrees, and you're always searching for the hidden meaning. And there always seemed to be a right answer. When I was teaching English, I wouldn't do it that way. I'd say to the kids, well, what do you think it means? Where did you get that? Uh-huh. I mean, it's a thinking process, right? There isn't a right or wrong answer. It's whatever comes out of you, what your response is. And you say quilts. I think that's what quilts are all about. Some people will look at a traditional a quilt and go, oh, that's marvelous and everything. And other people look at it and go, not my cup of tea. Same with modern quilts, that kind of thing. But it's whatever floats your boat. If that's something that makes you happy, then go with it. That we're not all the same with that. So, let's change course here a little bit and let's talk about your creative area. Where do you sew? Are you in that area right now or
Like like physical
physical area?
area.
Yeah, your physical area. Yeah.
So I basically took over the living room.
Oh, so many quilters do.
Yeah. So the thing is that so when I first started, I didn't know that this was going to be like my life. So I just set up my old Singer sewing machine in the living room. And then as it became more of a thing, I thought about changing the guest room to a sewing room, although honestly, it's too small to be my sewing room. Um, but what I realized is that I enjoy being in the space, in the common space.
Hmm.
Like I have a beautiful view from my living room. Not that we have like a lot of people coming over to our house, but like if people come over to visit, I like being able to sew while we are all spending time together. Um, because I'm just the type of person where I feel like I need to be doing something, like just sitting and talking to people sometimes it makes me feel antsy, but if I can be sewing while I'm talking to someone, I feel better about that. So, I really like that. Now, when I got the long arm, I kind of was very, very carefully broached it to my husband, was like, so how do you feel about this? And he was kind of like, will it fit? And I was like, if we're okay with spending this money, like I'll make it fit. Like we'll make it work. And luckily he was kind of like, okay, but it takes up like half the living room.
Mhm.
So I do have a pipe dream because we have an unfinished garage that
Uh,
just has bins in it right now. And so I'm in the process of trying to figure out if I can finish it and have a real sewing studio. And I have to say, I have mixed feelings about it. Part of me is like, oh my goodness, this would be amazing. And the other part of me is like, oh, I'd have to like go be
mhm.
in a different building. Will I even like it? Will I even use it as much? Because I kind of like, and I've heard that from other quilters too, like that will say, well, I have a sewing room, but I don't sew in the sewing room. I sew in the living room because everyone's in the living room, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, I've heard people say that, and a lot of people use the dining room table. They say, well, you know, it just sits there, don't use it a lot. So that's their sewing area. I was lucky the house that we're in, I've always had an office space, and it's a fairly large room. It's not large enough to put my sewing stuff and my long arm in. That's in a different room.
That
That's
would be very large.
yeah, my husband's workshop is where it was, but my husband is the one who he knew was looking at, and I thought one day I would love to have a long arm. And COVID hit, and He said, we're saving a lot. We travel a lot, and that's our main has always been one of our main activities is traveling, and that's a lot of money. And but we couldn't go anywhere during COVID, and we had our travel fund. He says, we have a lot of money saved up for traveling. We don't want to know when this thing's over. Let's get a long arm. And I said, if you're saying we should get a long arm and you're not even quilting, you're in the whole bit, then I'm all for that. But then we had to figure out where to put it.
Yeah.
And I already had taken over half of his workshop. It's sort of an unfinished area of the basement as my sewing dungeon, I called it. And I kept encroaching. I kept adding IKEA things and pushing into his area a little further. And then I said, all right, if we put it in the workshop, in your workshop, I will take my sewing room out. I will gut my craft room. That'll become my sewing room and it'll work like that. And he was good with that because he's very technically minded too. And so this was a machine and well, we're both like that. And machines fascinate us.
Yeah.
So that's how we got it in the house. But yeah, if there's a will, there's a way to make it fit. I like sewing um in another part of the house. He has his own room for sewing. He has one of it's a three-bedroom house. One room is the guest bedroom, master bedroom, and then he's got one of the small bedrooms and he uses that for sewing. And he's happy. He's upstairs, I'm downstairs. We don't have to look at each other, but it's not that bad. But it's the way it is because I said to him when I designed the sewing room, we can design this room so we can both be in it. He goes, I'm not going to be in the same room as you when you're sewing. There's no way. Because I'm a neat freak and organized. I mean, I have label makers coming out of the yin yang because everything's got a label on it, and he's the exact opposite. He believes floor space is extra storage space. You just throw it.
Oh, yeah. You guys need separate spaces.
Oh yeah, because it would be divorce court on that one. But yeah, I do like the social aspect of sewing, and that's why I do pop-up sew days, virtual ones, the whole bit. I love them. And yeah, there's something social about sewing with other people, or as you yourself say, if people come over and you can be busy sewing but still being social with them, I think it's the best of both worlds, really, on that. So, um, do you have a favorite tool or technique? And I think you have a favorite technique.
I do. So I was doing pixel quilts in the beginning. And then I don't know, I don't remember what brought it on, but probably just being on the quilting community and seeing FPP, and finally I was like, I gotta Google what is FPP. And then and then I was like, that's weird. Like you sew on the paper, what is that? So I, watched a few YouTube videos and I was like, I gotta try this out. So I just used some scraps and like some paper. And in the beginning, it fried my brain.
Hmm.
It's like completely backwards from every other way you would quilt. And I had to keep ripping things out and trying them again. But once I got over that learning curve, I haven't made any more pixel quilts. So I just love foundation paper piecing. I mean, I had like at one point I had another pixel quilt idea and I started doing it. And I was like, I don't want to do this. I think what I love about foundation paper piecing is that I can so easily plan it all out. So I use like Adobe Illustrator now to plan mine all out. And it's like I can plan it all out. And now I have come up with a system and I know that system's gonna work. It's like I know if I can draw a certain thing and look at what size it is, I know I can make it a quilt. And that's there's so many reasons why I love it, but let me tell you a few of them. One, I don't have to the cutting. Okay. When I was doing the pixel quilts, you all the precise cutting and the measuring, and then if your seam allowance isn't exactly the same, then it doesn't line up. You don't have to worry about that in foundation paper piecing. I mean, and I am not precise about my cutting with my foundation paper piecing. Like I'll look at it, I'll eyeball it, and I'll cut off a piece that's larger than it needs to be, but I save all my scraps and I use all my scraps. So I just find it easier. Now pulling the paper out,
Yeah.
that's the worst part. But otherwise, I love that technique. And then as far as like tools or other things, so I just got a new sewing machine.
What did you get?
It's a Bernina. It's a B 475.
Oh, yes.
And so but I have to say real quick, story to lead up to that. So I was sewing on my Singer and I got into the Reddit sewing community and someone had been commenting on some of my stuff and they messaged me and they were like, I have an old extra sewing machine I don't want if you want it.
Mm,
And I was like, because on Reddit, you people don't put information on their profiles.
right.
Like I don't know where this person is. I don't know how old they are. I don't know what their gender is. Not that that matters, but it's just like really
Yeah.
anonymous. And so I thought, I don't even know where this person is. So I was like, if you want to give me a sewing machine, like I will take a sewing machine. Just so you know, like I'm in the Western Washington area. And she replied, and she's like, oh, I'm in Bothell. And I was like, oh, it's 50, like 20 minutes for me.
Oh,
I was like, crazy.
it was meant to be.
So I was like, made a plan for us to like meet in a QFC parking lot. And she seemed like annoyed that I wouldn't just come to her house. And I'm thinking, I don't know you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Strangers on the internet could murder me. Like,
Yes. Yes. Well, it's
but
happened.
then we met and we just hit it off and we became like a best friend. She's my quilty best friend. And I took the machine home and after and I sewed on it for quite a few years and I didn't realize what she had given me. Like I had been sewing on this crappy Singer. It was what she gave me was a Bernina 810.
Oh,
So that's like 60s all metal like and I love old sewing machines, but I didn't know anything about Berninas. I didn't know how amazing they were and I would sometimes just randomly text her, I thank you again. I had no idea what you were giving me. And so I loved it. I mean, I still have her named her Bernie, very creative. And I just love that story because not only did I have a great sewing machine, but I met my quilty best friend, and we still have days where I'll go over to her house and we quilt together. But eventually, because I was doing so much, I was like, I mean, I should probably upgrade. And so finally I decided to upgrade. And I decided on, so I knew I wanted a Bernina because I'd been using a Bernina and I loved it. And I decided on uh, the 4 series because, first of all, I'm not doing enough quilting to be able to afford a $23,000 sewing machine.
yeah.
They're new, what, nine?
990. Yeah, the
Yeah.
B990.
No, I don't have that much money. Uh, but like realistically, and so I have a wonderful quilt shop that I teach at that's really close to me, and it's a huge shop and it's wonderful, and they sell long arms and they have classes and they're amazing. And so I was talking to the owner and I was like explaining to her what I needed, and she was the one that suggested it because I don't do embroidery. Like I use my sewing machine for piecing.
Right. So all you need is a straight stitch.
Right? I have a long arm. Like, I like the idea of having a few fun stitches because sometimes I like to do a decorative stitch on the binding.
Right.
But other than that, like, I don't need when she was talking about all the things that like the 7 series and the 9 series has, I was like, I don't really need that. Like, just going from a Bernina 810 to a Bernina 4 series, I mean, that's a huge jump, right? Like, so even like the threader and the like fact that it cuts the thread, and I was like, that's amazing. Like this is
Yeah.
a huge step. So I and I haven't had that machine for very long, but I absolutely love it. And I have to say, of course, I also absolutely love my long arm. Like that was such a great.
Is your long arm a Bernina?
No, my long arm is a handy quilter
Oh,
Moxie,
okay. Yep.
which I will readily admit I bought because it was the cheapest.
Oh, yeah.
Like I didn't think I'd be able to afford a long arm, and then when the Moxie came out and it was like 4,500, I was like, okay, wait, maybe I can afford this. And when I went to QuiltCon, I got to meet a lot of people. I met people at the Handy Quilter booth, and when I was talking to some people, they were like, "Oh, you did your quilt on Moxie?" And I was like, "Yeah." Okay, but I don't know much different. Like, well, that's not true. I teach long arming classes at my local quilt shop, and they have Amaras. So
Okay.
like I know the difference between a Moxie and an Amara, and the main thing is just that your frame is very narrow, right? Because there's less throat space, but it works great.
Yeah, and that's all that matters. And so when you're doing your long arming, are you doing it free motion?
Yes. So I with the frame and the taxes and everything, it ended up being about $6,000. And I said, well, how much would it be if I also got the Pro Stitcher Lite, which was Handy Quilter's
Yep. Yeah.
like electronic system, and it was going to be another $6,000.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, so I didn't plan on $12,000. So basically, what I told myself was, when you've made enough money off of long arming to pay off your long arm,
Hmm.
then you can buy
Spend.
the
Yeah.
software. But I will say though, I don't know, like I'm not gonna ever be that person who like long arming is completely my thing. And I feel like people who have like a full-time business doing long arming, they have multiple long arms and they're doing a lot of edge to edge.
Yeah.
So the free motion custom long arming I do is extremely labor intensive. And it's not anything that's going to be a like well-paying full-time job.
No.
But I would say it's more of a passion. So having it now for as long as I've had it, I would say that number one, I love having it for my projects. And number two, I do have a small clientele of people whose quilts that I've long armed. And I probably don't charge them enough for the custom work that I do. But I'm really passionate about custom quilting because when you put so much work into a quilt, to send it to a long armor that does edge to edge, and I'm not trying to diss any other long armors, but to just throw a pattern over it, to me almost feels disrespectful to the quilt
Yeah.
because how a quilt is quilted can completely change a quilt.
Hmm. And that's why
And
we have the
so,
expression, it'll quilt out. Say.
yes. So like I just and not necessarily with every quilt, but I feel like there are some quilts where like it would be a disservice to just do edge to edge. So I really like, so I tend to get people when people contact me, they have a quilt that is like either very special to them or very unique, or there's some reason why they don't just want edge to edge. And I've really enjoyed that as
Yeah.
much work as it is. And I will say, I said yes to something recently that I've never done before that I don't know if I'll ever say yes to again. I had an interior designer contact me and say that they needed some fabric long armed for there was going to be upholstery fabric for
Oh,
two large chairs.
right.
And I was like, oh, and the quilt shop had given them my name because the quilt shop only does edge to edge. They don't do custom. But I was like, oh, if you want something that's like really consistent, you probably want like it done with software, like you probably want edge to edge. And they said, no, they gave us your name because we want the pattern outline. So it was like a big floral print,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I want the quilting to trace
Oh,
the floral print. And so I was like, okay, so I go to meet this lady at the shop and look at the fabric, and it's 14 yards.
oh my God. Will you have
And
a
I said to
rifle?
her, I'll be honest, I don't know how long this is going to take me, and I don't know how I'm going to put it on my long arm. I said, can I cut it into pieces? And she was like, maybe in half. And I was like, okay, I'll try. But like, I don't even know if I can fit 7 yards of fabric on my long arm. So I ends up I was able to do 7 yards. So I finished the first 7 yards and I'm about halfway through the second 7 yards. Yeah. And she's like,
Well,
once you get it on the long arm, it'll be quick, right? And I said, no,
no.
no.
No, that's it. People who don't have a long arm have no concept of how long it takes, especially custom. Like my machine, I kind of laugh with you when you said how much you spent for your long arm.
Because you probably spent way more.
40,000.
Yeah.
Because I have an APQS, I have
Okay, yeah,
a
yeah.
Lucy, and I did get the computer software about 2 months, 3 months later, and that cost The long arm was about, now I'm talking in Canadian dollars. So in American dollars, it's 50 cents. But about $22,000 for the long arm itself. And then it was another almost $14,000 for Quilt Path for the computerized system. But I knew that I was never going to have the patience to teach myself how to do free motion quilting. I tried it. I don't
Yeah.
like it. I'm not dedicated enough for that. And I'm all about computers, technology, and computers, like technology in general. I do have an embroidery machine and I love doing machine embroidery and stuff like that. If it's a machine, I love it. So this was right up my doorstep. But I just did my first custom quilt using the
Yeah.
computer for it. And there was some trial and error on that one too. I'm still learning. I've had this
Because
for
even with the software, if you're doing custom, it's still not quick.
no, oh no, it's
Because let's say you have a design for a certain area, you have to,
yeah,
you
you
have
have to
to
mark it
put it in
out.
the computer, you have to mark out the area,
Yeah.
and then you have to stop and start and like it's still a lot of work.
And that's why when I first got my long arm, people all said to me, "Oh, well, are you going to quilt for other people?" And I said, "No." Well, you could pay for your machine by doing that. No. I would just look at them and I was a little facetious. I say, I don't need to pay for the machine. I paid for it already. I am
It's paid for.
fabulously rich. Back away. But no, I was being facetious. But no, I would never quilt for somebody else because I would make a mistake. And I don't want to do that
It's nerve-wracking.
on my own
Yeah.
quilt. Okay, I mean, I'm not happy about it when I make a mistake, but it's my quilt. But for somebody else's, no, I would be too uptight to do that kind of thing. So, but I do enjoy doing it, although I'm a piecer. I love piecing. So, and I want to branch into your area. So let's talk about your area. So your art quilts, you're doing foundation paper piecing. It's one of a kind stuff. I've been looking at your YouTube channel with this. You have kits, you have patterns for so right now foundation paper piecing seems to be the buzz. Everybody is into it, and I think that's why your site was recommended to me by one of my subscribers who's big into foundation paper piecing. I'll let you in a little secret. I hate it. Well, no, that's a little harsh. I have tried it, and as you said, there is a learning curve. It's that whole thing with the brain. I call myself geometrically challenged. Angles really throw me off, and I'm always one of those people who, when you're doing foundation paper piecing, I always cut the piece of fabric the wrong size every time, no matter what I try, and so I just find it too frustrating. I should go back in and try it some more. I know with a little practice, I know you can get over that hurdle, but I don't want to. I'm a
That's
piecer.
fine.
We all have our own tastes in this. So you were talking about the quilt store that you go to. Do you have a lot of places you can go to in your area to buy whatever you need to buy, or do you do a lot of online shopping or combination?
A combination. So there are a few quilt shops in my neighborhood, but really there's mainly one I go to. So well, to be honest, so 5 minutes from my house, there's a Ben Franklin that is locally owned. And the owners do a great job with choosing what fabrics to carry. They have wonderful fabrics. It's very convenient that it's close to my house. But the quilt shop that I teach at is called Quilting Mayhem. It's in Snohomish, Washington, and it's about 15 minutes from my house. And they're just amazing. I mean, it's a huge building. It has two floors.
Oh,
It
wow.
has like seven classrooms. It has half of the bottom floor is the fabric room, and then upstairs they have a whole area where they have all their machines. Um, and they have classes all the time. So they have not only do they have a lot of great stuff, but I've really like they've started to feel like family to me, and they'll like order anything that you want if you mention it. So I will also they do these great deals where if you buy a big ticket item, they give you a bunch of free stuff. So when I bought my long arm, you got like for once a month for a year, got one cone of thread, 3 yards of fabric, and a package of batting.
Whoa, okay.
Yeah, and so that was great.
I'm gonna move into your area. But
Yeah, so I really like collected, like built up my stash. So I buy a lot from them, and also I love Fat Quarter Shop
mm,
online.
yeah,
So, and I think one of the reasons why is because with what I do, it often is way easier for me to buy a fat quarter pack than to pick out individual fabrics because I do a lot of quilts with a lot of colors.
right.
So I would have a quilt like my Halloween quilt has like 10 different greens. So it's a lot easier for me to just buy a pack of greens that are already like sort of ordered lightest to darkest than to go into a shop and be pick out each individual one.
Yeah,
You do have to keep track of which ones you bought and which, because then if you run out, that's kind of complicated. But
yeah.
yeah, and because in the beginning, I was going to Joann's,
Mm.
and what I noticed is that some of my quilts, when I got to the point where I was quilting, there were holes. There were like little tears.
Oh,
And I was posting online and I was like, why is this happening? Like, I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. And overwhelmingly, people said, where'd you buy your fabric?
mm,
And being where I am now and looking back on that fabric, it's like you could see how open the weave was,
yeah.
you know? And so I went to my quilty best friend and I was like, how do I know if fabric's good? And I tried to get her to like explain it. And what I realized after a while is that when you use good fabric for a while, then you know.
Yeah,
Like you get to a point where you can see and you can feel a fabric and you know if it's good. So once the I went I got to one quilt where I was like, okay, I'm only gonna use high quality quilting cotton on this quilt. And once I did that, I couldn't go back because it
yeah,
was so much better.
yeah.
Uh,
Good quality makes a difference. There's
and
no.
I will say I do not have any deal with them, and I am not getting paid for this, but 100% hands down best fabric art gallery.
I have used Art Gallery. It's got such a nice feel to
I
it.
love it.
Yeah. And I know other people who say the same thing that use it on a regular basis. Other content creators that I'm friends with in the quilting community, they like everybody hands down Art Gallery fabrics. Oh, yes.
And I
Uh,
know there are a lot of other ones that are good too, and some of it's personal preference, but like for me, because I do foundation paper piecing and really elaborate and often really small pieces, the fact that it is thin is a big bonus for me because I can very easily get very bulky areas in my quilts because there are so many small pieces.
yeah.
And when you're working with sort of a heftier cotton, it will get to the point where it's going to be really hard to quilt through.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for
And
sure.
that's very frustrating to me.
So let's talk a little bit about your website. I have it here and I'm just going to throw it up on screen share, maybe, and I'll ask you a few questions about it. Let me get this coming up here. There it is. Okay, so that should be, everybody should be able to see that now. So this is the front page, I believe, of your
Yes.
website. It's called colesquilts.com. And so what is it that your website is offering us here? I see you have custom quilts, dragon baby blanket, quilt along. You've got PDF patterns. Tell us a little bit about this, what we can expect or what we'll find here on your website.
So I take custom quilt commissions. Um, very choosy about that. It has to be something like I'm really excited about doing and depending on my time frame. Um, but I also sell quilt patterns. So, and the quilt patterns that I have up right now, and there aren't a ton because it's so much work to make them.
Oh, yes, I know what you mean.
Hoping to slowly build them up. But I have some quilt patterns on there, and right now they're all just PDFs, but I will be having a legit kit that will be coming out. in the future.
Are you making it for legit kits, or you're saying it's like a legit kits is style?
No, like I have a deal with Legit Kits, and they're going to make a kit for one of my quilts.
Okay, well that's great because legit kits right now seems to be very, very popular.
Yeah,
So,
I'm really excited about that. I can't really say much else because I don't know the time frame or anything like that. But I just want to put that out there that there will be, and I'll put a link on my website once that happens. And then I teach classes at the local quilt shop. I also sometimes do virtual classes, although I feel like it's been a little bit challenging because people say they want them, but then when you schedule it, they're like, well, I can't do it then. So actually, also on that classes link, I started doing a class and people like schedules weren't working out or whatever. And so I started getting a lot of people saying, well, can I just see a video of the class? Can you just record the class? And so instead of that, I just made two videos about how to draw a quilt pattern, which is what people kept requesting. And I put them up on my website. So you can either rent or buy them. So
hmm,
if you rent, you can watch it within like 48 hours. If you buy it, you can download it. And it walks through my process of how I draw a quilt pattern if you want to get into making quilt patterns.
no, that's
I also have spoke at some quilt guilds. So if there's a quilt guild that wants me to speak, I have information on that. Another thing I've taken up doing is custom quilt patterns because I had some people who took my classes and then they emailed me and they said, I took your class, I tried to draw this, and I'm overwhelmed or it's not fun to me. And so they're like, can you just do it? And
that's
that's actually been really fun
I was going to say
because,
I've never heard of that as a service from anybody
yeah.
else before, so that's
So
unique.
And the way I do it, I don't do it all as one because I've seen a few people online that do create custom patterns, um, but they're usually smaller. I tend to do really big projects. So, what I will do is I will sort of talk to the person and make sure that they are cool with the way I do it. But basically, what I do is once I know what they want, I'll draw up a sort of graphic drawing. And then once they agree on that and I give them a quote and they agree on the price, then what I'll do is I will make a swatch chart for them. I'll send them a swatch chart. And all of my quilts are made with blocks, like legit kits. They're not large irregular shapes. And so I'll just let the person know, like, if you want to do this, I'll be sending you one or two blocks a week. Like, I'm not just sending you the whole pattern.
Oh,
And
okay.
it tends to work out well because number one, it would take forever
Right.
me to complete a huge pattern and send it to them. And then number two, they can get started on it right away. And then when they get an email, they can sew those blocks. And most quilters aren't sitting down and quilting 24/7 anyways.
That's true.
I
Yeah.
mean, I am almost, but like a lot of quilters, I have a lot of people I'm working with, I'll email them and I'll be like, you know, you want to update me with where you're at if I need to like be sending you blocks quicker. And some people are like, oh, I have a million projects. I haven't even started on that one. Just send them whenever.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All
That's true.
right.
You can see that. And then of course you have your custom quilting services too, your long arm services as well.
Yes.
So really, you've got a lot going on here. Uh,
Yeah.
sure. And so people can go on here, and I will put this link in the show notes so they can come here and explore this at their leisure. But I do want to talk just very briefly because we're almost going on to an hour here. So and I find it very fascinating. So I'm not that concerned about the time. But here's your YouTube channel, as we can see, and you have a lot of things here. It looks like you have your sew alongs, you've got your machines, you've got different unboxings. People love unboxings. They really do. And then, of course, you've got some shorts showing some of your work as well. And I just want to say to people on here listening to this, I think this would be a wonderful introduction to Cole's work if you went here and watched some of his videos, because I think you'll get a real sense of his teaching methodology and his creative processes in here, because that's what I got when I was watching your videos too. You did make me almost I said almost want to attempt foundation paper piecing.
Almost.
I may go back to it again. You're such an inspiration. But I want to bring us to the close here, so I'm just going to take this out, but I do have another couple of questions. So let me get out of here. Okay, there we go. There we are. So where are my questions? I hid them under the screen. There we go. All right. So the one thing I want to ask you though, so do you have any challenges or goals for the future in terms of your projects or of your business? Where are you headed? Where do you see yourself in the next 6 months to 2 years?
Well, the first thing I sort of have to figure out is how I'm going to balance this with my new job because it has it has progressed and so awesome. It's progressed so much that now I'm sort of at the point where I'm like, okay, I shouldn't take on anything new until I can see how this is going to go to balance it. I feel like, and I sort of, as you saw on my website, ended up doing a whole bunch of different things because I kind of was playing around with, oh, I could do this. Should I do this? Is this fun? I went through a period where I was like, maybe I'll be a long armor, maybe I'll do this. I think where my focus is really going to end up going is in pattern making. So I don't think I'll stop doing quilt commissions, but as I'm sure you know, you can't really charge someone enough
Yeah.
to make a quilt.
Yeah.
Like, um, like there's no way I'm charging for my hours. Like, it's really just a passion thing.
They wouldn't be able to afford you if any quilter, if you were to charge hourly rate,
Yeah,
no one
it's not it's
can.
not realistic. So, and I'll keep long arming, but I don't think now that I've done all these different things, I don't think long arming, I'm as passionate about long arming. So overall, the most exciting thing for me is designing. So I think what is going to end up happening in the future is I'm going to be focusing mostly on um, creating patterns. And then I periodically want to make sure that I also fit in making a quilt just because I want to make it to make sure that I keep that passion. So I actually have a plan for my next quilt that I just want to make just to make. It's been put on the back burner because I have all these other projects,
Yeah.
but I have the fabric sitting and waiting for it. So I think that's what it's going to be in the future. Now, I have, I went to QuiltCon, I met a lot of people, I got a lot of advice of like how you can like connect with companies and do things. And what I've realized is that I'm not great at social media stuff. Like, I like to make a video. It's a lot of work for me to make a video. I'm not going to be posting a video every week. Like, that's not. Plus, I kind of like, I don't ever want to be that person that's like, I gotta post because I have to post. Like,
Right.
I only want to post if I have something interesting to say. So I don't see myself ever being like an ambassador for a company or something, you know what I mean? Because
Yep.
it's like,
Yep.
I'm, that's not my strength,
No. Go
you
with your
know?
strengths. Go with your strengths.
Yeah.
It'll keep
So
you mentally balanced.
yes. So I think mostly I'll be working on quilt patterns, although I do hope to continue to work with legit kits in the future. I'm hoping that now that I've connected with them and they're making one of my kits, so we might be able to keep doing more kits because um, I've been told people love kits.
Yes.
I'm saying I've been told because to me that's weird because picking out the fabric is one of my favorite parts of quilting. And
Some
if you get
people
a
don't
kit,
like doing that.
yeah,
They
so
don't like picking
that's
out the
what I'm told.
fabric. Yeah, they get
So it'll be
overwhelmed with
great
it.
for people to have the option of like, oh, I can just buy the PDF pattern or I can get a
Yeah.
kit.
Well, I think you've got a great future coming up, and I wish you all the best with all of that. This has been a very fascinating interview. And thank you so much for agreeing for this. I could do another part two in this one because I am sure you have enough information about the things you're doing and everything like that that we could fill another hour. But and maybe down the road we will do that, if you're willing, and that if I find the time too for it. But in the meantime, though, I think you've given everybody a really a lot of insight into your creative process. I think you've probably got a lot of people really interested into foundation paper piecing as well. And as I've said before, they need to check out your website. They need to check out your YouTube channel, because I'm sure they're going to learn a lot there. There's a lot of interesting content to be had on both those sites. So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much. I've enjoyed this. I wish we could go for another hour, but I have a feeling that I wouldn't
People
be.
don't want to watch videos that long.
No, no,
But
they
thank you. This has been so much fun.
great. And yeah, so I'm going to say goodbye for now, but I will be in touch with you in the future, I am sure. And yeah, so thanks very much, Cole, for that. Just stay on the line here as I drop us out and have a great day, what's left of it.